Good morning and happy Friday the 13th. It's your lucky day. Glad you're here. My name is Phyllis Newbill. I'm an associate director in the Center for Educational Networks and Impacts, which is one of several centers within ICAT. This morning's talk is also from CENI. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. As always, we are streaming live this morning, and this presentation will exist online afterwards, so behave accordingly. Good morning if you're watching us online. Please enjoy pastries and coffee if you're here, and enjoy whatever snacks you have where you are. If you're here, we'd love for you to sign in. I'm going to send this clipboard around, so one of the ways that we can justify having snacks is by having the clipboard for sign-in, so please sign in. If you are a Virginia Tech faculty and PDN credit is helpful to you, make sure that you just sign up for that and also check in with me. Winnie is the little dog, and she belongs here, so she'll pick up any crumbs that are around. When you have questions today, make sure, just wait for me to get to you with the microphone. We'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. Make sure I get to you with the microphone so that the folks online can hear you. And if you're online and have questions, please go ahead and put those into the questions link, and we will get those read. A couple of announcements this morning. Today is the day that student seed grants are due by midnight Eastern time, in case there's any question about that. Also, we've talked a little bit about the AI ethics and policy through applied theater workshops. Those start today. If you would like more information about that, I've got a flyer here. Also, some of you were able to see in December the Nikki Giovanni experience in the Cube. It's just amazing. If that weather that day prevented you from coming or some other obligation, it's your lucky day because it's opening again on Wednesday from 10 to 5 in the Cube. So I hope you'll be over there at the Center for the Arts for that. And if you're online in Alexandria or Arlington area, you can go to the Torpedo Factory and see it there too. All right. This morning we're talking about metacognition. And we're going to hand it over to Jake Gross, who is the director of the Center for Educational Networks and Impacts.
Thanks, Phyllis. Hey, it works. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you today. So my name is Jake Gross. I'm an associate professor in engineering education, and I'm also the director of CENI. And this is the CENI Playdate, so obviously this is the ICAT Playdate, but CENI, as one of the centers, gets to host periodically. And so we'll talk a little bit today about some of our work. I mostly just put that picture in the bottom left so that you shamelessly share my kids, but also so you know why I'm so tired all the time. All right. So real quick about CENI. So CENI has sort of two complementary dual missions. One is this top one, which is really what you might expect for any research center. So this research centers at Virginia Tech exist, you know, to be pioneering some research that is really, really important in the world, and to convene faculty from across the university in that mission. And so, like any research center, that's one of the big things we do. And this other one is really because we're part of ICAT as an investment institute, we're part of the research infrastructure that supports all faculty at Virginia Tech. And so working with interdisciplinary faculty, anybody, helping them connect to the broader education system around us. So that's why when you think about CENI, you might think about Science Festival or fifth graders on campus every week, or the Science Museum. These are all things that we do as part of research infrastructure to help faculty and students connect with the education ecosystem around us. So today I'm mostly talking about this top one because I want to talk about some of our research priorities and some of our research in one of the particular areas. So if you've been doing like CENI Playdate Bingo, you might remember that we've now been here 3 times, or I've been here 3 times as part of something. A little while ago, we had colleagues at this top research priority, David Knight and James Newcomer, came to talk about a kind of national network, a research hub that we are part of that works with universities all across the nation in helping low-income, academically talented low-income students be successful in various STEM programs, largely engineering and computer science because it's NSF funded. The second one, you might remember Dr. Theo Lim came and talked about a project about climate resilience and community-engaged planning in Roanoke. That was a project that we're part of. Today, I'm going to talk about this last research priority for us, and in particular, a little bit about a systems thinking example. Because I'm an education person, my PhD's in ed psych, I love to talk about learning. And so really, regardless of whether or not you're specifically interested in systems thinking, I want to kind of tell you a story that gets you thinking about three things. This first one is, think about the people you work with, the learners you work with years down the road. They're in their professional setting, and what is it that they're doing that when you see them doing that cool, complex thing, that you think, that's us, like we did that. That was our program, that was our class, that was something I was helping them learn that they could then do later in life. The second one is, okay, well, how do you now break that down? What are the different component pieces that exist inside of that complex professional competency? And this third one is, now how do we scaffold it? How do we actually capture evidence of growth, and how do we help folks learn and grow in that way? And I didn't say it had to be easy to capture, how do we actually capture meaningful evidence? So these are three things that have really been fascinating for me and kind of undergird our systems thinking work, because for us, our answers to these three questions are about systems thinking. All right, so the project I'm going to talk about a little bit right now is a partnership with Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. You can see we've assumed perfect flying V formation here for the Mighty Ducks, if anybody's in that era. At the lead here is Brock Mutchison at School of Medicine. He's got expertise in assessment, and the Stemmler Fund is by the National Board of Medical Examiners, and the Stemmler Fund funds innovative assessments. So he's kind of the team lead here. And other folks on this, we have practicing clinicians, so Jed and Natalie on my far right, are clinicians and medical educators. Sarah Parker, I think, is a friend to many of the people in the room. She's at School of Medicine in the health systems program. She also runs the Smart Healthcare Hub, which is one of the destination areas 2.0. And then Heidi Lane runs their OSCEs, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and she's next to me and my colleague, Andrew Katz. So if you're thinking, Jake briefly flashed his bio up there, and I didn't see anything about medical education, so why is he on this team? That's a good question. So really it's about this one. It's about helping understand and unpack how physicians might pay attention to systems complexities. And that's because that's been a kind of core element of my work for a long time. So we've done, this is an older paper, but we had worked on a heuristic for systems thinking. So how do we help people, particularly say first year freshman design sort of people in an engineering context, think about decomposing a problem and thinking about technical and contextual elements. How do we get them thinking about how stakeholders view problems in fundamentally different ways? And how do we get them to recognize that no problem is just happening in this moment, that there's a history that wrought it and there's a future implications of anything you do. So that's one of the big things we've done. We also have done some open-ended scenarios to try to capture evidence of student thinking as they reason through a problem. So this is a community frame scenario, doesn't have enough information to solve any problems, but it does give us insight into how they think about things. So this works in our back pocket. I'm happy to talk about it more later, but this works in the back pocket, and this is why I'm on that team. And so what we wanted to start with is, okay, they're interested in how clinicians navigate systems complexities. Well, what does that even mean? What system complexities are relevant for clinicians? So we did an interview study with folks across the nation, clinicians, medical educators across the nation, and I came up with a couple things. This first one was a working definition of health systems thinking. It's an approach to solving problems, interconnections. All these things might look familiar to you if you've ever just Googled systems thinking. There's thousands of definitions, and they all basically say something about interconnections, layers of systems. So this is pretty common. Two other things that were really interesting from these interviews. One was that they talked about it as more of a metacognitive process. So it's not just about knowledge in a domain, like knowledge about health systems as a domain, which is important, but also how that intersects with other things, like the clinical knowledge about how the body works, or the knowledge about how certain treatments work, how different medicines work. So that was one of the elements that came out of this. And the other was that they felt like there's a lot of rhetoric about the importance of it, but that there's not a lot of good role models who are demonstrating that kind of integrated action. There's not a lot of good ways to say, hey, this is actually relevant to everyday life as a clinician. Like this shows up in my room all the time, rather than just kind of like a unicorn diagnosis thing. And so these are pretty interesting to us and resonate with a lot of the other work we've done with systems thinking. So one of the things we did was we tried to surface, okay, well, what is it like what are actual everyday examples, not just like, you know, if you've watched the show House, like all of a sudden there's this wild diagnosis that comes out of thin air, but no, like what's the everyday things? So this top one's really common, that folks have COPD and hypertension, and we were talking to an ER doc and they were saying, hey, you know, sometimes a person presents with exacerbated issues in the ER, and they have these two chronic conditions, and we don't really know which one it is. Like it could be either one. The treatment's slightly different in the current moment for what they do, but we don't really know which one it is. And so in this case, paying attention to social factors of the patient, understanding, say, is one chronic medication more expensive than the others, and so maybe they've stopped taking it if they're unable to afford it. These sorts of factors might actually lead to better care in the moment. And this other example is one that probably hits too close to home for many of us, that there's a lot of infrastructure challenges, particularly in rural areas, in terms of referrals and communication systems talking to one another. And so it's another example of just every day paying attention to systems actually impacts patient care, even in kind of everyday interactions. So one of the things we did was we tried to highlight some of these everyday things. And this is the framework that we use now when we talk about, in this case, metacognitive health systems thinking. This top part is basically recognizing that any clinical encounter is seated inside of a layer of systems. This is coming from more like ecological systems theory, if anybody's read about that. Very, very common. Think about micro, meso, macro levels of influences on something. So in this case, you've got the clinician who's kind of nested in a hospital team and then nested in this broader community and society, healthcare, health insurance, that sort of thing. Patient, same sort of idea. You have them nested in some local kind of family situation, and then the broader community in these shared spaces. And the challenge for a clinician is to actually navigate what are salient elements of those systems that actually influence the encounter in that moment. So what that means is like, what is it about the health insurance rules that might change at any given time that actually are relevant to my encounter right now? Or what is it about this patient's community history or their work life or their family life that's actually more relevant to the current moment than I might otherwise think if I don't surface that? And how do we get people to pay attention to those things, to surface those things in conversation if they actually are clinically relevant? And this bottom part is the metacognitive piece. And I think, there's a lot of different frameworks. When we think about metacognition, one of the first things that pops into many people's mind is awareness and control. So this is the idea that you're actually you're the one driving the joystick, right? This isn't just happening, it's not rote. It's like, I am going to pay attention and I'm going to do something about it. And this happens when this might be about how you self-regulate or you do metacognition in any context. In the aspect of systems thinking, what we say is we are trying to think about three different kind of chunks. One is that you actually notice in the first place, the sense-making process where you actually notice, what am I even supposed to be attending to? How do I fill in those boxes up at the top? What is actually clinically salient here? The next thing is you got to know how to do something with that. It's one thing to just notice the complexity that's relevant. It's another to actually have the coordinated knowledge and skills you need, or to tap into the other people who you need who have those knowledge and skills to actually do something about it. And the third, which has really been fascinating for me, because a lot of my work has been in engineering design sort of stuff, which happens in short moments, but it also happens over a long period of time. You think about a design class that occurs over days, weeks, semesters. In clinical encounters, they must bring closure in a few moments. Even if they don't solve the problem, they have to write a clinical note, which becomes a social artifact that gets stored in a system and seen by everybody. And the next time they go somewhere, a patient goes somewhere, the new doctor will see that clinical note. So whether they solve the problem or not, you have this real quick loop on needing to produce something that is actually evidence of your thinking. So this action component may not always be doing something that seems like you're intervening. It might even just be writing notes. But because those notes are social artifacts, it's part of the process. I'm not going to argue that these are perfectly clean boxes and how quick they happen or that they actually are what's happening in our brain. That's not my specialty. I'm a learning person. So for me, breaking it up in these chunks might help us assess better, learn better, give feedback better, teach better. So that's the purpose of breaking it up. One more kind of page on breaking it up. We use this analogy a lot, another shameless, just pictures of my kids. They are not as cute as that picture in the bottom left anymore. They're much older and bigger and stinkier. But balance bikes. If anybody has watched a child learn to ride a bike and then compared it to their own process riding a bike, I remember somebody pushing me and I was trying to pedal, and then I ran into a mailbox. That's my memory of learning to ride a bike. Now we do balance bikes, which they isolate for the kid. So instead of like training wheels, which was another isolation, we take apart this idea that you have to pedal, steer, and balance all at the same time. And in a balance bike, you don't have a kid pedal. Okay, they're just working on balancing and steering. So it's this idea that we actually use in learning a lot. We break things down, we have people practice component skills, and then we have them put them together. So in systems thinking, that model of sense-making, integration, and action, the idea is any failure to do good systems thinking in a clinical encounter could be for any of those reasons. Maybe they didn't notice things on the front end. Maybe they noticed all the hard things and thought, gosh, this is really hard, I don't know what to do about it. In which case, their problem was in a different area. So the bike analogy for us when we think about scaffolding, learning, and assessment is about how can we now isolate some components or give students feedback about which part of those domains, those kind of three things, are they actually having problems in. So that's what I want to talk about this last bit here is, okay, well, I've mentioned that I care about getting evidence and how do you give feedback. And so for me, again, as a learning person, that's about assessment. And I always like cringe when I say assessment because most people's reaction to assessment is not positive. Assessment drives too many things in a lot of the world that we live in. But as a learning person, assessment just means a way for you to know what's the evidence that somebody knows something and how do you get better. So assessment to a learning person doesn't necessarily mean standardized tests. That's not how it starts. So in terms of capturing evidence, I'm going to give you two examples. One is with this health team. So this health team, what we did was all of the work, the interviews, the framework, this was leading towards creating a 5-station OSCE. OSCEs, if you aren't familiar, I find them very, very interesting. It's this idea that when you're a medical student and you've learned some of this basic stuff, they have a test that you take where they have paid actors who are following a script, and they're sitting in a clinical exam room, and you go knock on the door, and you open the door, and you say, hi, I'm Jake, and what brings you in today? And you wash your hands, and you perform a fake exam, but you kind of run through the whole process. And it's not just about practicing interpersonal communication, it's actually also about taking a patient history, asking them questions, getting the right information out to then make a clinical diagnosis to say what you do next. So the purpose of our Stemmler project was to do those, but to make them about systems embedded things. So to make them basically embed the complexity in the scenario so we can see, is the person asking the questions that surface, say, the social conditions that might impact this condition? And then if they do that, do they do anything with it? So we've had a 5-station OSCE running for a year now there, that every spring they do this 5-station OSCE. There's 5 different scenarios. There's a rubric that the doctors get together around afterwards to kind of rate students. This is not used in a high-stakes way. It's to give feedback. OSCEs are used as part of their regular assessment process, and it can be high stakes. And I can tell you, having watched students do it, they are very clearly nervous. Like I always think about this one where like the person, they go in, they wash their hands, and then they go to shake hands with somebody and they realize they haven't dried their hands. And so then they turn to the paper towels and they get the paper towel. Like you can just feel so bad for the person. And then I think, how great that they can actually practice that before that's a real patient, before that's me in their office and I'm actually, nervous about my situation. So it's a pretty cool environment. And I think it's really cool because it reminds me how little we are able to do that in engineering education. We practice a lot of what I think are cool things, authentic assessment kind of stuff that we think is useful for people's future. But this kind of simulation of something that in a short term that they're gonna do pretty much every day on the job is pretty fascinating. So I just wanna kind of pose that question to you, like what would it look like in your setting to actually do more simulations, short-term simulations, where people practice actual professional situations? So that's one example. The other example is I want to go back to the Abeesee instrument that I just flashed very briefly up on the screen. So this was an instrument that, again, was community framed. We ask a series of stock questions. We've used it a whole ton for research and teaching. What do you think the problem is? What information needs do you have? What stakeholders would you involve in planning a response? That kind of thing. One of the challenges we've always faced, there's a couple of challenges we face for that, but one of them is it's not boring to talk about afterwards in a class, but if you're a student taking it, you're just like writing answers to questions, and even if it's not high stakes, they're still just text-based questions. And so interaction would be nice. Another part of things is it's very static. So like we give them these vague things, and they tell us very interesting information, but then we're not able to actually interact with them, provide more, ask a follow-up question. We've done that in interviews, but we haven't done that in our static test, which is what gets used the most. And so what we've been doing recently is trying to use LLMs just on the making it interactive part. So this is like the most, I find it interesting and useful, but like this is a very boring use. I am not an LLM AI leading researcher. This is a very everyday use of, can I just use it to make my scenario interactive? So I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing for that, and then I'll have questions. So we've built this place called the Systems Thinking Playground that we're piloting for research, where basically, what if we had a series of scenarios that build on top of our prior work, where people could practice their systems thinking skills. And so we are piloting these 3 things in research this semester and in the summer. 2 versions of Abeesee. One is, what if we ask interactive follow-up questions afterwards? Second one is, what if in the middle of Abeesee, after we've asked them those first couple questions about what the problem is and what stakeholders they'd involve, what if we paused, took a time out, and let them actually chat with stakeholders from the community and see what information do they get from them, and then how or if they use it afterwards. So that's what I'll just show you briefly. Again, this is not dynamic, so I'm just gonna have to tell you about it, but I'm happy to show you later. So the stakeholder chat feature is basically, we've got 3 primed stakeholders that these are like 3 different conversations they can have. They are, it's an LLM, so it's gonna talk with you, but we've got it pretty directed. So it's got some things it can share, it's got some places it's supposed to say, I can't tell you anymore. And the goal is to let them talk with, in this case, this is Samuel Green, a community organizer. He's been working to help the community and face this problem. And has information about some of the things they've tried and some of the experiences of the people in the community, and can answer questions about that. We let them chat with these 3 people, and then they go back to the assessment, and it basically just asks them, what of your previous answers would you change? Would you change anything based on what you just did talking to stakeholders? So this is an example. I just said, okay, let's pretend I was talking to Samuel Green. I say, I feel like I'm supposed to come up with a solution to this problem, but I don't know anything about the people. Like, can you tell me about the people in the community? And so Samuel Green, tells you a little bit about that. And again, this is ongoing chat. You can swap to another person. You can swap back to this person. They don't know, just like if this happened in real life, they don't know what you've said to the other person. So it's not like they're not all sitting in the room together. They're like 3 different, chains of conversation. And so this is just an example of another thing we've done. So it is 9:22, and this says stop by 9:23 for questions. So briefly, I want to just say thanks. This has been a team effort with a lot of people in a lot of different places. In particular, since I talked about Stemmler, I have their acknowledgement there in terms of the funding support they provided. And I'm happy to chat about any questions. That is a Barcelona ostrich. It's my favorite questions picture.
Thank you, Jake. What questions do we have in the room or online?
Thank you, Jake. I really like this idea of imagining your student or the person who you're working with to learn to break the skills into constituent parts. And to focus on the balance bike is a really good example of that. I wonder what you think about this idea. I'm one of these kind of hopeless romantic people who don't view education as like a step towards a career. I know that's like a privileged I view one of the highest outcomes of education is discovery of self. Mm-hmm. So could you extrapolate this kind of model that you have to think about like your student as an adult who's like becoming themselves 5 or 10 years down the road, and what breaking that into constituent parts might look like? Just like a better critical thinker and somebody who's a better member of their community.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's a good question. I am not a hopeless romantic, but I appreciate that you exist. No, I think, for me, this figure, it's got words on it that make it seem like it's specific to a domain, but for me, like, this is how I think about all life. So if I think about what's the usefulness in life later, like, this idea that I can pay attention, sense make, that I can encounter a situation and I can actually identify salient things, like, what are the multiple factors that are creating an issue here, whether it's in my community, it's in a relationship, it's in a professional domain, like, thinking about why is this situation what it is, what are the driving factors, and then what might I do about it or not do about it. I mean, sometimes you can't fix everything, but also the clinician part of this was always interesting because it made me realize that even if you don't, they have the social artifact of clinical notes, but even just for us, like, if I reflect on something, I've like unpacked everything, I've messed with it, and then it goes back in the box and in my brain, and the next time I pull it out again, it's really back the way I had worked on it. Like, it was in a different form than before. And so I think for me, I have always been fascinated with systems thinking, and my interest was actually first in a community engagement setting because I was working with students and in kind of with nonprofits and complex issues, and people go in thinking they have answers and they come out realizing this is more complex than I thought, and we were struggling to figure out how do you capture evidence of that. Like, yes, as an educator, that's right, that's what I want you to do. I don't want you to feel like, I don't want to disenchant you to think you can't make a positive impact, but I also don't want you to think that you can change the world with just simple knowledge and just your own expertise. Like, you have to understand that it requires a bunch of different people. You have to understand that your framing of the problem is not the one and only framing of the problem. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I think for me, like, systems thinking is absolutely something I think everybody should do every day. And it's, you just have to be careful you don't like get in an analysis paralysis loop. But,
Thanks.
yeah.
I'll come right back to you. Get Lisa first.
Hi, Jake.
Hey.
Thank you. I am thinking about using part of what you're doing in a class like ID Pro, and I'm wondering how would we be able to use this in a class period? I mean, and also in terms of motivation and learning, like, I can see it being really relevant to stakeholder analysis, but would you advise for it to be graded, or, and just a few thoughts about how?
I didn't hear the very last part. Would you advise?
Would you advise for it to be graded in any way, or how would it link into, already, that structure that we have to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the grading piece, I would say, is always, people need to make those decisions really carefully. We've never used this for grading. And the main reason why is because, it's challenging to do, and you want people to get better at it, and you don't want them to feel like they did a really bad job. So the main way we use this, previously, before the LLM kind of interactive thing, the main way we'd use it is, if we were gonna use it in a class, you'd have people either do it the night before, or you'd have them do it in the first 15 minutes of class, and then you have them pair up and talk about it, and then you talk about it as a whole class, and then you show the heuristic afterwards, and you kind of talk about, okay, to what degree did you do this as you talked about the problems in the scenario, and then, how much you do it differently, or how did the other person in your group actually, see this braid of the problem, technical and contextual, differently than you did. So yeah, we use it in class a lot, and pretty much any time I teach, I use it. And I know several people who use it all the time. In terms of the LLM part, I mean, I do think we are always interested from a research perspective, but this is a great teaching tool, because otherwise it's just a boring assessment. But if you actually talk about it, I mean, it is an interesting scenario. We're hoping that some of the stakeholder stuff makes it more interactive and that's also more fun. We'll make the site live at some point. I mean, it actually is live, and you could create an account. I can give it to you. You could welcome or play on it. You have to have a vt.edu account right now. But the main reason I wouldn't want people playing with it is, like, we haven't tuned the feedback part in the back end of the system yet. Like, we have a rubric that's been used a whole lot, and it'll tell you, you can click a button that says, please give me feedback. We just haven't actually done the study yet to say, is it making things up? Is it following a rubric? Are we happy with what it's doing? So yeah, I would just say, with the disclaimer of, we are actively analyzing the LLM responses. So yeah.
Hey, Jack. I was curious about whether the diagram that you had can handle implicit knowledge, right? So you talk about how you can capture the clinical features where it's very visible, observable from whoever's standing by, but there's a lot of this kind of just invisible, almost like not. It's hard to tell by just watching someone doing it, but you can sort of see from the way they're doing it, and then be able to say, oh, that's actually correct, that's not correct. So I was curious whether you have some thoughts about those kind of implicit knowledge that can incorporate in your diagram, in your system.
Yeah, thanks. This is a good question. So I would say we break this up for good conceptual reasons, but if you blow up any one of these boxes, there's whole really great frameworks and literature that undergird it, and also decisions. So for example, sense making is like a whole body of literature. Integration is similar. So this implies sort of a vocational education approach, which I don't think they necessarily take implicit knowledge as seriously as some other factors. They're about knowledge, skills, attitudes, how do they mix together? And it's a pretty boxy, like, these are the things. But there are other models for how you integrate knowledge, or how you do knowledge transfer too. Like, there's like high road transfer, low road transfer, different models of transfer. And I think that's ultimately what's happening in this bottom box. So you could pick a framework that better highlights implicit knowledge. The one we are using inside of integration is really pretty basic. It's pretty much, what are the knowledge domains? What are the skills? Which in some cases might be like in a clinical setting, it might be like a surgery skill or intubation or like something that you do physically even. So yeah, that's maybe not a great answer to your question, but I think if I really wanted to focus on that, I would swap out the theoretical model that I would use for that to explain that middle box.
All right, well, we are at time, so I want to thank you, Jake, for presenting this morning, and thank all of you for being here on this chilly Friday morning. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back next week with more snacks and coffee and tea, and also another great speaker. So have a great weekend, and thanks so much.